in the past. So I would first congratulate the World Affairs Council for identifying these 6 issues and also for making cybersecurity issue number 1. So it's going to be our privilege to delve into those issues a little bit, and you have the great fortune of having a real all-star panel here. Lori mentioned briefly a little bit about each of the panelists, and you have a lot more detail in your program. Let me just add a couple of more notes. Lieutenant General John Davis, Deputy Commander of U.S. Cyber Command, but Deputy Commander sort of understates the responsibility, if I can say so, sir, because the National Security Agency and the Cyber Command are sort of housed together. But General Keith Alexander, who's the commander of Cyber Command, is also the director of NSA. So, correct me if I'm wrong, you're actually the senior person who is exclusively dedicated to Cyber Command. So we have, in a sense, the number 1 person from Cyber Command here with us. I'll also point out that General Davis has a long history as a Marine aviator, and I don't quite know what this is about, that he is now the 2nd Marine aviator to run Cyber Command. He replaced General Schmittel, another Marine 3-star. And so, for me, one of the interesting points here is that our national security leadership has chosen proven warfighters to direct Cyber Command, which I think underscores the importance of the cyber domain as far as our future war planning efforts are concerned. Frank Cilluffo here is a real pioneer in the field of Homeland Security. Lori mentioned his early service in the Bush administration and also as an advisor to Tom Ridge, who was the first Homeland Security Secretary, and now, of course, Frank is director of the Homeland Security Institute at George Washington University. So a real top expert on Homeland Security thinking here in Frank Cilluffo. And finally, Kevin Johnson. I want to say something about Kevin. You know, Secretary Chertoff, in his remarks, talked about the importance of red team planning and the role that white hat hackers play in actually testing the security of systems, and it's actually called a penetration tester in the cybersecurity field. Their role is to attack the good guys' sites and see if there's any vulnerability there that can be exploited, which then leads to hopefully to a patch or some kind of security fix. That's been, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, that's been your specialty. So we have 3 people here who can really elaborate on a lot of the points that Secretary Chertoff mentioned in his keynote.
Don't get anything wrong with that. With permission.
Right. I said white-hatted. The pay might be better than black hat. You're on the right side in this case. I wanted to begin with, Secretary Chertoff mentioned the danger of a cyber 9/11. And, I've been a national security reporter for many years. Cyber is one of the areas that I cover at NPR. And we've heard this, idea many times that how great is the danger of a catastrophic cyber attack, a Pearl Harbor, a cyber 9/11. And I have to say, I think we all understand, there are people out there who really wonder whether this might be overstated. How serious really is the risk of a cyber 9/11? We haven't had one yet, and there's a lot of money being made in the cybersecurity field. There are some skeptics who wonder whether this threat might be overstated in order to inflate defense contractors or something like that. So let's begin with you, General Davis. We haven't had a massive cyber attack yet. How serious really is the danger of a catastrophic cyber attack that would actually destroy parts of our civilian infrastructure?
I think the risk is real. It's out there. I think I was in the Pentagon on September 11th, and on September 10th, when I went to work that morning, I never really thought that a terrorist strike would take place the way it did. With big folks flying not just one airliner, but they'd actually hijacked 4. In a lot of ways, deep introspective thought after that, me personally, what did I fail to see? Failure of imagination, never assume an enemy capability or an enemy desire. And a catastrophic cyber attack, for those of you who are not engineers like me, and you think about what that could look like, it might unfold something very different than we expect. There's a lot of slides out there in my world have lightning bolts on it and, things blowing up, but it could be destructive malware, a worm that comes from it, basically shuts down. And I think that's the way it would unfold. It could start shutting down systems. They don't blow up or smoke, but they shut down. Or if a bunch of money disappears from, at the end of the day, trading Wall Street, we lose $5 billion worth of transactions. What would be the impact on Wall Street if that took place? So I think we have to be creative. There are creative people out there on our side that are thinking about the art of the possible. I can guarantee you there are people out there with stereo vision and opposing thumbs who are thinking about doing bad things to us. But they have the capability, they have the desire, they'll find a capability to find a way to do that. Our job is to try to get out in front of that. To be creative, to be the architects and try to deny them the ability.
Good. Frank, a little twist on that question. Secretary Chertoff and others have often categorized the cyber threat in terms of cyber crime, cyber espionage, and cyber war, cyber destructive cyber attacks. Are you comfortable with that kind of paradigm, thinking of the cyber threat? Do you think that the emphasis is, properly allocated between those areas?
I think we do need to use more precision when talking about cyber threats. Not all intentions are the same, not all capabilities are the same. At the end of the day, you have a whole host of different perpetrators and actors, and while the sky may not be falling, we could be due for a really bad day. And we need to be recognizing that. So when you talk about countries such as Russia, China, who are integrating computer network attack into their warfighting capabilities and indoctrinating it, yes, that could be a worst case scenario. When you talk about countries, but they're deterred to one extent or another because that could obviously escalate into a hot war. And the flip side is when you have countries such as North Korea or Iran, they clearly have the intention, they don't necessarily have the capabilities, but they can turn to, sort of like terrorists turn to an IED. There is the potential for a drive-by shooting in cyber where it can cause massive harm. Does that mean the sky will fall? No, but it could potentially be debilitating. So I do feel we've got to get to the point. Not all hacks are the same, not all hackers are the same, and current company excluded. I think media needs to also do a better job when they start explaining these sorts of things, because they are complex. We need to be precise, and there are some real concerns we need to be cognizant of, but when you're talking about the greatest challenge, I would argue, is computer network exploit at the moment. If you can exploit, though, if your intent is there, you can also attack. Mm-hmm. So that is the way I think we've got to start thinking about how you rack and stack the threat, and then how you address each of them, because they're going to be a little different. Crime is rampant. I think it's worth saying that technology changes, but human nature remains the same. So if it happens in the real world, it'll happen in the cyber world, and I think we've just got to get a little more precise in how we discuss these issues.
Okay, well, maybe let's try and make some summary on that this morning. Kevin, tell us how secure our networks are, and in particular, reverse that, how vulnerable are our networks, and in particular the industrial control systems that control so much of our infrastructure. You've got long experience of probing those. What's the state of security of those systems?
I think the problem here is that it's early in the morning and I'm not sure I want to upset everybody's sleep. I think that, well, it's very simple. We have security. We are not secure, right? I think, in tying this back to the previous two answers, the previous two questions, I think that we have a major problem with how we define things. I think that when we say things like cyber Pearl Harbor, which I personally find offensive. Mm-hmm.
But attacking Pearl Harbor, right?
Well, yeah, what do I do? But, I find that we talk about things in a very grandiose manner. We talk about things of people are going to die, things are going to fall out of the sky, things are going to be horrible. At the same point, we say the same thing when we say, are we secure? We've missed a key point. Our job is not to be secure in that absolute end state. That would be the same thing as saying, are we bulletproof? Are we impossible to explode? None of those can happen. Our job, our responsibility, our goal is to be as secure as possible, to raise the bar, so that when the attacker gets in, we're able to say, wow, we did everything we could to stop them, now let's react. And so the answer to your question, are we secure, is an outright resounding no. As a matter of fact, as the father of 2 young girls, it keeps me up every night. We have a lot of work to do, and I think that we have done it a disservice, and we've actually keyed people away from it by talking in these not us, right? Not here, but when we see the headlines and we see these things they're saying, Cyber Pearl Harbor, the cyber catastrophe, and the sky is falling, people look at that and say, I can't fix that.
Right.
That's an impossible goal, not going to try.
Okay, well, in the interest of precision, let's talk about actual facts and real-life events. And Secretary Chertoff mentioned the attack on Saudi Aramco and also the attack on Rosgas in Qatar. There has also been some attacks in South Korea. General Davis, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Secretary Chertoff said that those attacks were carried out by groups, quote, believed to be sympathetic to the Iranians, unquote. Do you agree with that? And would you say that there are nation states out there right now that are carrying out the kind of destructive attacks like the attack on Saudi Aramco that we need to be concerned about?
I'll tell you, sir, I'm not going to tell you what country or what countries did that. We know who did that.
You know who did that?
You know who did that. But I'm not going to answer that question specifically.
But it was a country.
It was, we know exactly who did it. And bottom line, a nation state or a group might decide to do something like that. It actually came from 2 different zip codes, the Saudi Aramco and the Rosgas attacks, or computer activities that basically wiped out 30,000 hard drives for Aramco, and actually did a little more damage to Rosgas. Actually got more in South Korea, more stuff. And again, destructive malware attacks, basically where they went out and wiped out data. We call it bricking a computer. Where they had to order Aramco ordered 30,000 hard drives in order to do that. Bottom line, a nation state can use those kind of capabilities if they decide to. I think they're out there probing, looking for what the red lines are. They can use that as an asymmetric attack if they want to do that. Certainly, if you look out there, not just the Russians and the Chinese, but other countries are looking at this the way, a place where they're going to organize cyber forces to do this kind of work. To try to impose a cost on their opponents. A lot of times we look at from the military perspective how we defend the Department of Defense networks against something like this, but also there's also a component out there, how do you protect the critical infrastructure from some kind of attack. And the U.S. Cyber Command has a role in doing just that and making sure that they can't do something like that to our critical infrastructure. And again, I think we try to balance this. My job is to scout out ways and means and identifying the kind of focusing on what the source of the problem is and the solution to the problem. And I can articulate a little bit of what Cyber Command is doing to try to do that and how we're organizing ourselves to do that. But a tremendous amount of growth the last 18 months is how we specifically go about the plan. 3 missions for us, defending critical infrastructure against a cyber attack. And I'll tell you, that's not just cybercoms alone. It's a team ball. Maybe that's why they have Marines in there, because we combine everything and we team. Well, we're always, kind of the underdog in a lot of these things, and so we know we need friends and partners in that space, and we do have great partners inside our government that are trying to get their arms around this thing, support our combatant commanders, and also, too, I'd say, goes to what you're talking about, sir, operating and defending our information networks in the Department of Defense. I would tell you, I think, for a long time there, we just operated our networks, did baseline compliance defense. Now much more active defense, which really we think we need to do to keep our network secure, make them hard. More importantly, teach our commanders, you're going to take it, like a ship, an airplane. Once you take it, how do you operate, how do you fix yourself? And you actually give the commanders the tools to know if they got a weak enclave out there, they got to protect that, identify their key cyber terrain, what they got to do. They can't protect it all, but what do they have absolutely positively have to protect, and how to fight that. So bringing in the operational art into the cyber realm for the Department of Defense, we think is really important. So we're working in those 3 areas.
Great. Frank, you've testified before the United Nations on the danger of cyber terrorism. We're talking here more about attacks by a nation state. Give us a quick rundown of your view of the threat from cyber terrorism.
Sure, I actually had to go twice, which I'm shocked, because I thought I was PhD in the UN, but I had to speak twice, once on cyber, the day after the revelations was Mr. Snowden, so that was an interesting time. And another time on looking at what I would call more terrorist facilitation of cyber. So by and large, when you look at the threat dynamic, for the most part, foreign terrorist organizations live and breathe on the internet. They need it for their own tradecraft purposes. They need it for their own intel collection, target selection, the ability to communicate between and among one another. And most importantly, I think, to facilitate radicalization, to facilitate ideological objectives. In my case, I focus mostly on jihadi-based terrorists. So at the end of the day, can will Al-Qaeda turn to computer network attack? Yes, possibly, but not necessarily in the strategic kind of way that someone's making a decision at the highest level of a hierarchical organization. I said before 9/11, actually, whereas Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden may have his finger on the trigger of an AK-47, his grandkids will have their fingers on a mouse. So I do think that that is going to be part of it, but I see it more in terms of enabling kinetic attacks. So in other words, for them, they still are looking for that bang for recruitment, for radicalization, to raise money. But they could look to make, they could use cyber to make their kinetic attacks more lethal, disrupting emergency 911 communications, causing confusion, these sorts of issues. So at the end of the day, I think some of the talk about cyber terrorism is overblown. But I also think that is something we need to be concerned about from a tradecraft standpoint. It's absolutely critical. It's their lifeblood. They can't afford some of the communications that countries have, so they're going to be turning to the net. And we've got to continue to follow them on the net. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure that it's a computer network attack. It's more how to facilitate their own tradecraft and the like. All that said, that can change. If the intent is there and they can see they can have a maximum effect, I do think when you're talking cyber, its attribution is hard, anonymity is difficult. Who knows who's surfing behind the weight of any of these individuals? Someone can be well-intentioned, but they don't know who they're communicating with in chat rooms and the like. And it's made for plausible deniability. So all that said and done, I think they're still focused kinetically, cyber coming, but I'm more worried about nation states from computer network attacks. Okay.
Well, Frank mentioned Edward Snowden. And, you know, one of the risks of inviting a journalist to moderate a panel is that he's always going to want to talk what's in the news. So we do have to deal with some tough issues here for a moment. General Schmuller, General Schmuller, your predecessor. General Davis, you have a couple minutes here to think about where we're going with this.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, Frank said something really important. He said a couple things. He said that terrorists live and breathe on the internet. And he said that as part of our counterterrorism effort, you have to be able to follow them on the internet. That idea has a lot to do with the whole controversy we've seen around NSA surveillance. Because what our NSA leaders have said to us repeatedly is that the bad guys use the same communication systems that we use. And if they're going to go after the bad guys, if they're going to go after their communications, they have to be able to look for them in the networks that we all use. And that's a really important sort of background that partly explains why it is that the NSA got involved in collection efforts in the very communication systems that we depend on. And that's sort of the background of that conflict. Now, this is a question for you, Kevin, and then I'm going to do a slightly different version for General Davis. So, as a result of the NSA's determination to go after these communications, they have to be able to go into, smartphones. They have to be able to go into email systems. They have to be able to break the encryption that the bad guys and the good guys use. And as a result of that, the NSA has invested a lot of resources and time into looking for vulnerabilities, into looking for backdoors into these systems. The question, Kevin, is, does this create a conflict of interest? Inasmuch as the NSA is looking for vulnerabilities so that they can use those vulnerabilities to go after the bad guys, maybe they don't even want those vulnerabilities fixed, because as long as they know where the vulnerabilities are, they have a way to get into the bad guys. Does that create any challenge for people from the defensive side who worry about cybersecurity?
Hey, I've got 4 daughters, so I'm up all night too.
So there were a number of points there. So the first one I'm going to address is, does it create a conflict of interest in the NSA for the NSA to look for backdoors and vulnerabilities and everything else like that? And my answer is no. It doesn't do a conflict of interest at all. I'm a very firm believer. I mean, it's let's be blunt. My perspective is slightly different than most people's. I'm not a defender anymore. I used to be, right? I am now an active defender. My belief is...
And you better explain that, because that's what really important.
Oh, it is. and it's a controversial term, right?
It's kind of the offensive version of defense.
The
right?
best defense you can have is good offense, right? I'm a very firm believer that if we don't understand the attacks, if we don't understand the vulnerabilities, if we don't understand the weaknesses in our system, there's no possible way for us to defend those systems. So no, I don't believe there's a conflict of interest for the NSA or any government organization. Let's stop picking on the NSA. Let's stop idolizing an idiot like Snowden. Sorry. But I am an opinionated guy too. So I think that we have to find those vulnerabilities. We have to find...
And fix them or not?
Well, I'm getting to that second point. Because you then brought up that there's a benefit to whoever is listening in, whoever has to have access to them, to not fix those vulnerabilities. And I would disagree with that statement. First off, if you believe that us fixing the vulnerability we found here, or the vulnerability we found there, means there are no other means to get into that system, then you are naive and not paying attention. And I don't believe that of anybody in this room. Second, not fixing those problems causes as much problems for the people monitoring as it does for the people defending. Because as you're monitoring stuff, as you're looking at stuff, attribution is important. We talk about that when we talk about active defense. We talk about that when we talk about cyber terrorism and everything else. Is attribution is key. And as long as vulnerabilities exist, attribution becomes more difficult because of that idea of who is riding along behind you, who is tailing in, who is using grandma's computer to pivot through. So I don't believe that there is an active effort to prevent the remediation of vulnerabilities. There may not be an active disclosure of those vulnerabilities. If the NSA or the National Institution of Health, for that matter, and I'm not saying all of a sudden headlines everywhere, NIH is monitoring people. That's not what I said. But if they find those vulnerabilities, it would be the same thing as saying to a general in charge of tanks who looked across the battlefield and said, wow, they didn't deploy correctly over there. Would we expect them to announce and say, wow, those tanks are in the wrong place?
The difference is that only armies use tanks. And what we're talking about, the systems we're talking about are used by everything.
Don't we use tanks to defend us?
Go ahead, sorry.
Right.
No, but I'm saying that there's a difference between military and civilian world.
See, I believe there are differences in the military and civilian world, but in this case, that difference is not important. To announce the weaknesses that you're using to defend your country, your organization, or whatever, did they have to? And I'm not, please understand, I'm not entering into the political ridiculousness that is, did the NSA do the right thing?
Can I jump in just for 1 second? Because to Kevin's point, give a little more time. I mean, one thing we do have to, I do think the battlefield incorporates all of society, so it is a little different than traditional battlefield thinking from a national security standpoint. I also think those that can integrate this into their warfighting capability will be the dominant players looking ahead. I also think that makes this whole issue unique is economic security is inextricably interwoven with national security. So you have a different level of responsibility. But one thing I do very much agree with Kevin on is the initiative right now remains with the attacker. I mean, that's the bottom line. The initiative remains with the attacker, and I think that we'll never firewall our way out of this problem. That said, we do have some responsibilities to protect our civilian systems, and we don't want to intentionally be because DEA runs their informants on these things, DHS, CBP, you name the agency, whatever it may be. So you've got a dilemma there, but to think that you can firewall, it's like having a soccer team. If you have the greatest goalie in the world, the best thing you can ever do is tie. And if you have a good defense, the best thing you can ever do is maintain at best a level playing field. So it's a mix of all of the above. The rub is, where do you prioritize and under what circumstances?
All right, there's always a danger talking about cyber issues that gets kind of too technical and too complex, so I want to sort of keep it as friendly as possible. So General Davis, from a defense point of view, encryption is a good thing. We want encryption, right? If you want to go after bad guys, you want to be able to break encryption. Isn't there a conflict of interest there? Do you want a better encryption or do you want to break encryption?
We've been working this. I mean, there's analogies out there. I want to be able to break decryption. I want my stuff encrypted.
Right.
I mean, I'm not about playing fair. I want to be able to crush my opponent, basically. You'd expect nothing less. You'd expect nothing less than us to find a way to win.
Right.
Okay, protect our country, find a way to win. Yes, absolutely. That's one of the reasons we are co-located. We are the best decryptors, the best encryptors in the world. That's, and I was the CEO of Marine Fighter Weapons School in Yuma, Arizona. Fat, dumb, happy in 2006 when I got selected to go to Fort Meade for the first time. Failed college math, didn't like computers. But I was a school advanced warfighting graduate and had been doing Johns Hopkins for advanced degree there. And bottom line is, General Alexander said, I said, hey, sir, I've got no interest in what you do up there at the war. I don't want to come there. I want to go to Iraq, is where I wanted to go. And he said, hey, I've got the world's largest percentage, or largest concentration of math, computer science PhDs in the world, because I don't need any more. I do need somebody to organize them. We're trying to put this military capability together. We need somebody to organize it. That's why, what house would you like on the base? That was the first time you hired me again in 2012. So I would say we do want to be able to break encryption, and we want to be able to encrypt. We don't want them to be able to read our stuff. We want to identify where our gaps and seams are. I'll tell you the first barrier of defense, I think, because I'm a bit of a historian, not in the cyber realm, is the Maginot Line. Okay, if all of your defense is based on a Maginot Line type defense, you are going to get had by the competent that's dreaming about ways to get around and outmaneuver you. So a defense, it's not only encrypting our stuff and being able to decrypt their stuff. It's about having, I would say, a very thoughtful approach to how you're going to defend your networks. A lot of people think about cyber command in the offensive realm. I'll tell you, a lot of our most fruitful work and what we're really putting a lot of effort into is our defensive work. And I would call it not your baseline defense, but our active defense. You call it penetration testing, I would call that red teaming. We looked at, we always think of our networks in terms of probably everybody here. I can guarantee you think of your desktop computer or your PDA as the network you're attached to. I've got two sons that fly airplanes. I fly airplanes. I think of that network as the plane I fly or the radars I plug into. So the military here, those are network pieces of equipment. So that commander who has to portion and allocate scarce resources might say, as I go look at my opponent has, from an offensive standpoint, these are the 5 key things I need to be able to go after in the cyber realm to integrate with my other conventional means to try to achieve my military objectives in a fight. Okay, so I'm gonna tell some guy that's a cybercom component to go after these 5 or 6 nodes. Focus on that. On the defensive side, I'm looking, what is my key cyber terrain? What are the things I must have and must defend? So I'll tell you, we've had a compliance-based mindset for how we defend. On our exercises, we never let the red teams come exercise against our nodes because they always win. Right? So as a CEO at the Fighter Weapons School, we always had at Mods 1 in Yuma, Arizona, we always had the graduation exercise where we started small scale skills, small threat, you know, teach the instructors. Then at the end, it's a force-on-force, World War IV scenario where it's okay to lose, as long as we don't kill people, right? Can't crash airplanes, kill people. But we train really hard, and then we come back and debrief that. If you have a cyber exercise where you don't let the red teams in, and everybody at the end declares victory, I would say that's just shy of delusion. So what we built now is a thing called, I'm going to call it simply active defense. I call it smart defense. Basically, and how the military organizes for everything, which drives everybody crazy, but teams and uniforms and patches and things like that. Really, these things we're designing called cyber protection teams. We've already got a couple of stood up now that has a inspection team. Part of it's organic to its whole, which allows the commander to go out and inspect an enclave. It could be looking at an enclave that you know is weak, or has been undisciplined, or maybe if it's a cyber enclave, maybe it's not the strongest cyber enclave. There's not a lot of standardization in networks that we operate in right now. So I can go inspect that, look for gaps in scene, and then I find sometimes my greatest threat is Lance Corporal Davis, right? Not trained or educated to the degree he or she needs to be. Now we give them a training that's called a green team, 7 people doing that. Then a blue team looking for, hey, we found your software is not as strong as it should be, you don't have the latest stuff, let's go and fix that. We put all the 3 together, a little tighter thing, and then we put a red team, which you would call penetration testers, ethical hackers, white hatters, that are trained to go after that particular enclave, to go after, like the enemy would go after that enclave and try to break it.
A red team plays the role of the enemy.
They do. They look for gaps, but I use military terms. We've kind of said no new terms in cyber command. Just standard military document, and it all works. It does, trust me. That's why we've got a Marine simple carbon unit. Looking for gaps in scenes. And then we take the white team, the blue team, green team, fix those. And then we put a hunt team on the inside. So very high-end attackers, like the red team's attack. And they look for the destructive malware, the things that don't belong inside that network, inside that enclave. Okay, now you have a fighting chance. Now you might take a hit on game day, you know you can actually fight your way out of it. I might, as a commander of an air wing with 50 squadrons, some squadrons weren't as good as others. And I had tools available to me to fix those weak units. You've never really had a kind of capability where a commander could go, my senses they're weak, they need help, I must have them. So now we're developing the cyber protection team, 68 in total. For the combatant commanders, we each get 2. This will get some. Most of them will go to our components. I'll tell you, we took a cyber protection team into making down to Lockheed Martin and showed them the F-35. Okay, that is in that work. Okay, it's actually been designed and built pretty well. But the United States Marine Corps, the Air Force, and the Navy are going to take delivery of that airplane. And you got to hand it over to Lance Corporal Davis to go work on. Right? You laugh, but so we have to make sure that we can keep that thing secure, that we can basically find the stuff that might be trying to come in from everything we try to plug into that airplane or communicate to that airplane. Because I can guarantee you there are people out there that want to go after that particular network and try to knock it down. That'll be somebody's key cyber trained to go after that, much like it's mine to protect. So we are going in a very organized, dynamic way to develop capabilities to defend our networks, active defense.
To defend our networks. And we know from the Snowden disclosures that the NSA is a lot about surveillance capabilities. This is where this idea of a conflict of interest comes up, where one agency is really interested in surveillance and breaking into systems, another agency is in defending networks. From that has arisen this controversy of maybe the Cyber Command and the NSA should be separated. Right now it's a dual-head organization. This is apparently under consideration. What are your thoughts about that issue?
Well, I'll tell you that I would say that it works right now. It works pretty well. I know that that's being discussed at the highest levels of the government, but I'll tell you is we will make it work regardless, whatever they do, whatever our decision makers decide. My job is to make it work for all of you and all of us, and we're working that really hard right now. I find that so it's really great. I mean, again, for guys not an engineer learning this business, I've got military folks now plan, put things together. We've actually grown a fair bit. The number one, and I would say I'm strapping into a F-35. That's the highest end airplane I get my mitts on, right? What they built, what our nation has built up there is the best thing I can go do my job from. It really is. So I don't want to be separated from that thing, that technology, those 480 PhDs, that gives me my best chance for success to defend all of us, to defend and also support our combatant commanders. On the flip side of that, the other side is the human capital that's up there, the creative energy that's up there, it helps me solve my problems. I can't recreate that right now in the military. So I'm leveraging those brilliant people to help us do our job and basically get us up to speed as quickly as we can. So the dual hat works. We will make another arrangement work. It might not be as efficient, but we will make it work.
Yeah, Craig, I just want to phrase it a little bit different for you. The last time we saw a big reorganization of the intelligence community was in the aftermath of 9/11. The comparison has been made within the intelligence world that the Snowden disclosures are, from an intelligence point of view, as damaging as anything that we've seen. Are they so damaging that we might now see a major reorganization as a result of this, of intelligence capabilities, including such things as reorganizing the NSA and cybercrime?
Sure. I mean, out of 9/11, you did see, since the National Security Act of 1937, the greatest reorganization in the United history, both in terms of looking at some of the authorities, roles, and missions of agencies, and obviously creating a new department, as well as IRCTA, which came from the Hill, which was the Intelligence Reform Act. So a lot of change. We've kind of been in perpetual change, to be absolutely honest. And sometimes we fall in love with the boxes and the org charts and don't remember the mission. I'm about the mission, the outcome, and I would argue that's why bifurcating the two may actually be good. And the reason I say that is I think that at stand-up, and I just had my students have to write papers on this and debate this, and it was a good, lively debate. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. But one of the things that I believe is politics will drive some of this decision making. You shouldn't make it based on the political sensitivities of the moment. It's in what's in the best interest for the capability. And I would argue at the time of the stand-up, you didn't have the bodies, you didn't have the capabilities. There were only so many people, and we're all fishing in the same pond for that talent, and there weren't enough. I think now gradually we're starting to see a little more capability. The reason I want to see them split is guys who steal secrets for a living never want to compromise how they did something. Guys who do things for a living and have a responsibility to act, I call it the twos meet the threes. The twos are the collectors, intel, the threes are the operators, the actors. You're always going to err on the side of not acting. I think if you routinize cyber in a weird way, you bring it into the same fold, because cyber touches airspace, land, and sea, but it is its own domain at the same time. But if you create it as its own COCOM, not a combatant commander, not one that's a subordinate COCOM, but its own COCOM, in a weird way, when you use it, you're going to use it for real, but you're not going to use it liberally. And right now, you're kind of in this short of war, what is this, what is that? I'll tell you one thing. Military leaders are the least likely to turn to a military solution if they're given that option. They will weigh all the options. Everyone seems to think otherwise, quite the contrary. So in a weird way, by doing that, you routinize cyber, and you actually elevate cyber to the other domains, and you're less likely to be in this wishy-washy, what's short of war. And I think that actually will be constructive for the community, because the other thing to realize, we have the most to lose. We are the most dependent. And when we use it, we want to use it for real.
I absolutely agree with the idea that
We haven't articulated a deterrent strategy. By the way, you've got to first do that. Dissuade, deter, compel. And we said everyone's doing this stuff to us, but what the hell have we done in response? Don't get me started on that one.
the only concern that I see with this idea of splitting the attackers from the defenders, from my perspective, you lose an understanding of
It's actually the collectors from the actor. There's a difference there than the attacker. You're going to need both in both.
You are
still going to
both
need
in both.
attackers.
And that's where I see the problem is that people are starting to talk about, not your answer, but we're starting to see out there discussions of defense is defense and offense is offense. And we're losing perspective, and I think that there's a win. It's not.
Hey, if I could weigh in there really quickly, just, you're right. I would say in order for me to do my job, a lot of my job is I'm collecting. But I'm collecting for my purposes.
Collecting is intelligence, gathering intelligence.
Yeah. If I'm in zip code far overseas, so everybody don't worry about that. But I'm actually going after military objectives, and I've got to do a lot of what I consider, so same kind of thing that the other guys are doing, but I'm doing it for our purposes. And then preparing options so we can have a deterrent strategy or something like that. So what I would also say is really that I hope we're not going between attack and defense, because really, even my first tour at Fort, I'm like, because we'd actually separated. I ran an organization my first time called Joint Functional Component Command Network Warfare. I had a very good friend of mine, Jennifer Napper, that ran Global Task Force, Global Network Operations. Those were the operators and defenders. I was on the other side of the ledger if we ever decided to do like that. And I'm like, I don't get it. And why would you separate? So we always have to do things together. You know, there's always force, counter force, blow, counter blow. So I would say, young Marine reconnaissance guy, we don't train one Marine to be a defender, another one to be an attacker, another guy to be sneak up in his ghillie suit to go spy and look at the target and say, they said, you want the guy who's going to sneak up in the objective area to be able to know how to kill if you need to, be a sniper. And also, we want him, these really highly trained guys, when he'll bring him back, he better know how to defend himself, be smart enough to know how to defend. Right? So actually what I need is all three, all in the same thing. We hope it's the same thing for our fighter pilots. We train, so we don't train you only can defend, you only can attack. We train our folks to do it together. So really, that for the military perspective, they all have to be together.
It's how it has to be. The one thing, though, that I would, in general, maybe I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that. I see Cybercom today where Special Operations Command was in 03. Tons of capability, authorities, Title 10, Title 50, where DOD needs intel, a little fuzzy. So maybe we need a JSOC-like process for cyber.
All right, General Davis is going to have to run. He's going up to some important meetings, and we don't want to have him miss it. But I do want to give a minute or two here for people out there. I love this subject, and you know what? Here are some of the issues that we did not get into. Should there be a cyber militia like Estonia has? What is the business case for cybersecurity? A lot of businesses, question whether something that is rare is really worth preparing for. We haven't gotten into that. We haven't gotten into cyber espionage. We haven't gotten into whether there's a manpower crisis, whether there are enough trained guys out there. These are all really important issues, and as you continue this discussion, these are the ones you should focus on. But before General Davis takes off, I want to give someone out here a chance. You, sir.
Yes, we talked a lot about preventing penetration. However, I wanted to ask you about backups and redundancy. I wanted to ask you about backup and redundancy. You've talked a lot about preventing penetration. Well, at home, I have an external hard drive, so that if my computer crashes, I have talk about redundancy.
Actually, General Davis mentioned that, how you need to teach your warfighters how to fight hurt. That was an interesting expression, how to fight hurt.
And to build resilient systems as well. So it's interesting as we look at the kind of the architecture we have and the networks we have and how to defend those. A lot of times, I would say, a commander, a lot of times goes, that's not my business. I've hired some guy to take care of that for me. Whenever we talk about our networks and our IT, frankly, it's about how I buy things or how I manage things. I ask the question, we ask the question now, what is your readiness, sir? So a lot of this is commander's business to understand this. So what is your readiness to be able to do this? When we do your exercises, knowing to test your airplanes or your infantry units, we're also going to test you from a cyber perspective to see if you know how to fight hard, how do you fix your own networks, and basically have you the other thing out there as well, because we talked about removable media and kind of, I'd say there's a technology solution to the security side, but everybody wants to come sell us stuff. A new gizmo, a new ray gun, the new thing that will make my life so much easier, right? But the other thing you've got to address is the education and culture side of that. Okay, so if I start treating my IT, my networks like a weapon system, start talking in terms of military readiness, we're going to start to handle this and deal with this a lot better than we have in the past. As a wing commander, as a squadron commander, as a weapons and tactics instructor, I knew how to make whatever piece of gear the U.S. taxpayers gave me sing. I knew how to make it operate. I knew where the threats were out there, whether it was a rogue aviator, or it was weather, or it was bad maintenance practice, or the bad guys. I knew how to mitigate those and make the best of what you guys gave me. We need to get the same space in the cyber realm. Okay, so we're getting our arms around that. We're changing the lexicon. We're changing the culture. If I was to say the one critical delta I have right now, we have as a nation, is the trained force. So got it.
Universities
He's talking
recognize that.
military speak. When he says the big delta, that's the big change we need to bring about.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
I gotta tell you that. Ma'am, here.
I just for a second, where you said radar and blank are the network systems.
Radar. I was telling a story, I probably was off on a rabbit hole. Radar.
You said they're the network systems.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was just giving examples. Everything we have is networked. Whether it's our communication systems, our overhead assets, our aircraft, our ships, everything is networked. Everything's got a computer in it, everything.
Which makes it more efficient and also more mobile.
My follow-up question was, since I know your cybersecurity group seems to be in the forefront of protection, do you share the information you're gathering from the military to Homeland Security?
Absolutely. And if you looked at our critical infrastructure task, you say Cyber Command's got the mission to defend our nation's critical infrastructure against cyber attacks. I'll tell you that is we have one small slice of that, all right? The FBI's got a big slice of that, Department of Homeland Security's got a big slice of that. That's very much team ball, how you basically problem solve in that space. A lot of things we see, a lot of it's we're getting better about. I see this, and it's almost like, what do I know? Who needs to know it, right? So we're getting a lot better about getting that information out, spreading it, and sharing it laterally, quickly. But we're not doing it at light speed. We're doing it telephonically. We talk about the legislation that's out there. We're going to need to censor our country so that we can basically get the threat indications and warning quickly to know when someone's under a cyber attack in the future.
Can I say we do need legislation? One of the things that's stopping this is the legislative, the authorities to be able to share this information. That is critical. The likelihood of that happening in this Congress this year, slim to none, which is why I think private sector active defense is the future. And I'm happy to get into that.
Joyce Davis, let's see if we got it.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Tom. You guys have really sobered us as to the potential for catastrophe with all of this. Our next panel is going to be on education, but my question is how much is being done to really educate in a real way the American public, and especially those vulnerabilities like hospitals or schools or wherever there could be loss of life? Is there a comprehensive plan that's even being thought about, akin to what we would do for an earthquake or a hurricane or anything like that? It seems to me we've got to educate people about what to do, because it seems to me it's going to be inevitable there's going to be a catastrophic attack.
Why don't you take that, Frank? You're the Homeland Security expert. Well, you're all are, but.
Well, no. I think that we tend to think that we love to pin the tail on some entity that's responsible for that. I would say this is actually a K through 12 set of issues. Tom was mentioning Estonia, for example. Estonia invested everything in cyber because they tried to free themselves of the Soviet Union. So their entire livelihood, economy, healthcare, everything is invested in cyber. I recently took my MBA students not only to meet with all of their folks, but to actually meet with the K through 12, because in their gymnasium, when they go to high school, the students that are interested in what they refer to as ICT, IT kinds of fields, they're given a tablet. And the teacher says you have 2 weeks to be able to identify the vulnerabilities and try to break into the school system. The next day, they're told they're given a D. If they can't alter their grade to an A, they end with a D. So basically, there's real incentive to be able to learn how to ethically hack. Now, the Estonians realize they're going to do it anyway, so let's try to do it in a creative, comprehensive, and organized kind of way. So my short, long-winded answer to a short question, universities have a huge role to play, but it's not just more computer scientists and electronic engineers. It's actually getting these softer disciplines to appreciate cyber and getting the cyber folks who tend to speak tribe speak and speak tech speak, and I call it talk and squawk, meet deep and squeak, two different worlds. But you need to get those different entities together, and I think universities have a role to play, but I'm telling you, your 2 daughters, my 4 daughters, they're teaching me. And it's kind of scary because I do see the dark side, because that's what I do for a living. But I feel don't wait for government. This is actually universities, it's parents, it's schools, And it's K through 12. It's not.
It's also commercial entities. One of the biggest things that we've pushed for our clients and getting out there is when you do that annual checkbox, I teach people security awareness, not clicking links and things like that. Teach them how to secure their home network. Teach them how to respond to things there. Teach them how to protect their kids. Because if we don't change the culture of sharing, put sharing into this, we're never going to succeed. If we're waiting for the government to solve this with some earthquake FEMA plan, we're going to fail.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to leave it there because these guys have to run. If you want to come up and ambush them afterwards, they're on their own. I do want to tell one quick story that you just reminded me of, Frank. Kevin, I think you're familiar with Sounds Institute, which does a lot of training. Sounds Institute did this competition for to identify young sort of cyber experts a couple of years ago. And the guy that they gave the first prize to went into this, they had this kind of competition and they got grades, they got scores. The guy that won actually hacked into the grading system and changed his grade. He changed his grade to make it the best grade in the class. They knew he had cheated, but they were so impressed by his hacking that he was able to go in there and change his grade that they gave him an award.
That's absolutely correct. The mindset is one of hacking, right? We call it professional evil. You have to have it. He had it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, folks.